Thank you very much. Everyone can hear me? Yeah, great. Okay, so yeah, thanks for having me actually, and big thanks also to BMCP and to Alex and Christian and also to Moritz for this great organization of the event. Happy to be here. As David said, we will talk about evolution of blockchain regulation in Europe, just to give you a very brief introduction on that topic, because everything of importance we will discuss later in the great panel we will have with some more expert in this field. So, where do we come from? Everything started with Bitcoin, as you all know, and as time went by, the business cases and the possibilities with blockchain grew, so grew the market and also the law. So let's take a look at 10 years before, or even a bit more. Back in 2009, when Bitcoin started, actually, we already had a financial regulation in Europe, which was already widely harmonized. So we had anti-money laundering regulations in place, which was at that time, back in those days, the Anti-Money Laundering Directive number 3 already, and national implementations of that directive, because directives from the European Union work like that. They produce some rules which have to be transposed into national law at a later stage. So member states in the European Union get usually 1.5 years to implement the rules from the directives to the national level. And that's what happened with the AML directive as well. Blockchain units at that time, of course, were not regulated explicitly in that directive. How could they? Because it was a completely new technology. And to be honest, in 2009, maybe none of us in this room already thought of blockchain possibilities. So didn't the regulator at that time. Crypto trading actually was not regulated explicitly as well, but in the European Union, trading of financial instruments was already regulated and harmonized. In the MiFID directive, now since 2014, we have the second one of those, but back in the day, we had the Markets in Financial Instruments Directive number 1, and a regulation for regulating the organized markets as well. We had a market abuse regulation to prevent manipulation of the market as well. But anyways, it was regulated. The trade of financial instruments was regulated, but crypto assets, as we today know them, were not regulated at all. And fundraising, which is actually the main topic of today, was not regulated as well, not explicitly regulated, but still we had some rules on fundraising, on securities, issuances already in the EU, which was actually the EU prospectus directive, and again, national implementations of that. But anyways, the idea that fundraising could be tokenized back in the day was actually not born yet. Yeah, so at that time the question was always to what extent crypto is actually covered by the current regulation of the financial markets and the financial regulation in Europe. So this is just to give you a short and brief overview about what we had until 2018. Why do I say 2018? Because in 2018, we had the AMLD 5, the 5th AML directive, which was really the first piece of regulation in the field of financial regulation in Europe, which explicitly regulated some sort of crypto asset. And the term actually that was used was virtual currency. Virtual currency as a word is actually a bit misleading because, or too narrow, because it only focuses on the currency side and on the payment use case, but not on what is also possible, which would be fundraising, securities, tokenization, what we discussed today. So before 2018, we didn't have any explicit regulation in Europe, but still it was possible in some parts to again discover the possibilities of the regulation. Is that what we have? Probably already applicable to crypto-related or to crypto-based business models and projects. So AML3 and AML4, 2015, we had the fourth AML directive. I already told you, crypto assets were already covered, but not explicitly, but as a property. So you can spend them, they present a value. So that is the reason why money laundering and terrorist financing can, of course, also happen with properties in the sense of with crypto assets. Yeah, so back in that time, it was already possible to commit money laundering crimes on basis of crypto assets or virtual currencies. The transfer of funds regulation, which is actually today very, very important because of the implementation of the travel rule you might have heard of. At that time, it only concerned funds in the sense of fiat money, electronic fiat money, so not applicable. The MiFID II and MiFIR regulation has not already covered crypto assets at that time as well. However, tokenized instruments, financial instruments, were possible actually. Yeah? So it was still possible, for example, to have a bond tokenized, and then as a bond, that crypto asset was actually a financial instrument in the sense of MiFID II. Yeah? That is what we did quite often also with Black Manta Capital Partners, and you know that is possible on basis of the regulation we already had in place. Without any amendments, just like that, it was possible. MAR, which is the market abuse regulation, it was actually not applicable to crypto assets such as native coins like Bitcoin, Ethereum, Ripple, whatever. It was not applicable, and also the rules of the market abuse regulation only apply to financial instruments that are traded in organized trading facilities. Yeah, so it was not possible the provisions of the MAR did not cover crypto assets or virtual currencies at that time. The EU prospectus regulation, that is actually what you need when you want to draft a prospectus for a securities issuance. Sets out rules what content you have to put into the prospectus. It is all harmonized all over Europe, so this is really a hard regulation and not a directive. Yeah, so the rules from that regulation apply directly to the market participants, and is not necessary to first have the member states to transpose all the rules from the directive to the national level, but it is directly applicable. Yeah, so this is really something which covers all the continent of Europe, all the European Union, and the further member states of the EEA as well. Yeah, so that is something which is really interesting, and of course for tokenized transferable securities as well. So at that time, before 2018, even though it didn't happen until 2018, it was actually possible to say, okay, we have a tokenized security, and for that tokenized security, it would be necessary to draft and set up and have approved by the competent authority a securities prospectus. Yeah, so the rules as they are today, without any change, they still apply, and that is what we actually work with until today. Last two things I want to mention would be the Payment Services Directive. We have number 2 since 2015, which is actually not directly applicable because it only relates to funds again. Yeah? Funds in the sense of legal tender, fiat money, and everything that is crypto asset or virtual currency without the status of a legal tender does not fall under the scope of the Payment Services Directive. Anyways, it is still possible that some special forms of money, like for example, electronic money, as it is regulated in the e-money directive, or also number 2 since 2009, it is still possible that e-money, for example, is issued in the form of blockchain units. Yeah, so that possibility is also given, even though back in 2013 already, BaFin, as the German regulator, published their administrative practice on Bitcoin and comparable clones, and they stated Bitcoin is not electronic money because it lacks an issuer. You don't have an issuer. Anyways, when Ethereum came up and the possibility arose that crypto assets or virtual digital assets could also be issued by someone who set up simply a smart contract. At that time, it was already possible to be the issuer of a new crypto asset. Yeah? And that still means that it is possible to produce e-money based on a blockchain, which is very, very interesting because you really have the ledger. You can see all the transactions that happen. So it's very handy actually for e-money. And that is, until today, still possible. Yeah, so you can see the regulation in place was already quite sophisticated, and it was possible to cover crypto assets as well without even name them. As of 2012, we had international institutions who really assessed the risks of crypto assets and the need for regulation. The main driver actually and the most important aspect ever since actually was AML and TFR concerns. Yeah? So the institutions were afraid of the possibilities to use crypto assets as a means of anti-money money laundering or terrorist financing. And therefore, they really focused on that topic. If you take a look at the numbers today and on the actual cases of money laundering crimes and terrorist financing, you can see that it is actually, the criminals are really reluctant to use them. Yeah, because as you all know, the transactions in Bitcoin or similar are traceable. And that is something criminals really want to avoid. Anyways, this was the main driver for all the regulation that came. As I said before, the first thing that happened was that we had the amendment of the 4th AML directive, which was the 5th one, and covered virtual currencies. So AML was really the driver, the main driver here. So the European Central Bank, should be a C, the European Banking Authority and the Financial Action Task Force, those were the institutions which really focused on that topic. They also addressed investor risks because people were really afraid of the possibilities. And if you remember the ICO bubble, for example, there were some scams and some cases of problematic investments, which is the reason why they focused on that in their publications as well. Development of the crypto regulation. I only have 2 minutes left, so I should talk faster. AMLD5, I already told you, it is already in place. So currently we have a definition of virtual currencies in the European regulation. We also have VC to fiat and fiat to VC exchange platforms as obliged entities, which are obliged to perform KYC, KYB procedures. More interestingly, since a few days, actually, we have the final version of the Markets in Crypto Assets regulation, which will really be a game changer. We have lots of regulations in that directly applicable regulation again. Yeah, you can see people really want to have, or the lawmakers really want to have rules for the whole continent, applicable for the whole continent, and not directives which has to be transposed and then details which are different in all the member states. One single regulation here. Passporting regime, licensing requirements for all the service providers in relation to crypto assets, definitions of crypto assets, lots of things. Market abuse and manipulation regulations as well, since the MAR, as I told you, is not applicable currently. And then also we will have a big change in the AML regulation, which is also a future regulation, but we already have a draft. And there we will have a homogeneous AML regulation within the EU and the inclusion of crypto assets and crypto asset service providers as well as obliged entities. So the whole market will be subject to the AML KYC procedures in Europe. The crypto asset transfer regulation is the amendment of the TFR, the funds regulation, the transfer of funds regulation, also a future regulation, but we will have that, and this is the implementation of the travel rule from the FATF, which will come into effect in close future. And last but not least, something which is really important for security tokens as well, the DLT pilot regime. In detail, probably we will have to discuss that later on our panel, which will now follow, but it will provide facilitations for investment firms, for CSDs and market operators with regards to crypto asset trading on regulated markets. So thank you very much for your attention, and really looking forward to the panel. David now takes over the word.
Exactly, I'm just gonna say thank you.
Thanks.